This video covers Module 1 Part B, Introduction to Marketing and Audience Research Analytics. Whereas the previous video introduced AMB 201 as a unit, in this video I'll be introducing marketing and audience research as a general topic. We'll go over some different ways in which research can be classified so that you can understand some of the basic distinctions, and I'll talk a little bit about potential research pathways or research career pathways that you might want to investigate. One of the most valuable ways to start thinking about a complex topic like marketing and audience research is to look at one of the definitions for it. A definition from Malhotra is presented here, and he describes it as the systematic and objective approach of gathering marketing data, then analysing and interpreting that data to help uncover opportunities to make better informed marketing decisions. Now, that's quite a cumbersome definition. It includes a lot of information, so what's helpful to do is to break that up a little bit and look at the components of that. The first point is that marketing research is systematic. This means that there are set procedures and set methodologies that exist for conducting certain types of research, and we need to follow those methodologies in a very organised way when we conduct research. Doing that allows us to be confident that when we gather data and when we analyse data and when we draw interpretations from that data, that we can be confident in those things because we followed the correct procedure. It's also important so that other people can trust what we've done, so that other people can come in and potentially replicate what we've done in order to see whether or not they find the same outcomes. It's described as employing an objective approach to gathering marketing data, and this is really quite important because it speaks to the idea that when we conduct research we have to try to be as unbiased as possible and impartial as we possibly can. This is so that we can maintain integrity in the data that we've collected, and so that people can be confident that the findings that we arrive at or the conclusions we draw are valid and accurate of the true state of affairs. Often it is difficult to prevent your own personal biases creeping in. If you've invested a whole lot of time and energy into a project, sometimes you want to see a certain outcome, and there is a temptation there to ask a certain type of question, or ask a question in a certain type of way, or perhaps only ask a certain type of person to answer the questions in order to get the desired outcome, and we have to avoid that as much as possible. Businesses, when they commission research, will very often have a vested interest in seeing an outcome. You can think about a social marketing organization, for example, that's invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in an anti-drinking campaign. They want to see that that was effective, so they want the research to show that it was effective. They can often apply pressure in order to see those sorts of outcomes. We have to resist that and try to remain as objective when we're collecting data as possible. You say that marketing research is not just about collecting data, but it's also about analysing and interpreting that data. So it's very much a process. It's not just going out and collecting data, which is what people tend to think of when they think of doing research. It is that full process of analysing and drawing conclusions from that data as well. We'll talk about the research process a little bit today, but in this video, but also in an upcoming video, because that mirrors what we talk about across the semester. We also say that marketing research is done with a purpose, so it's done to uncover opportunities and to help make better informed decisions within a business setting. So this is really getting at the idea that we don't just conduct research for the sake of it or just out of curiosity. Marketing is an applied discipline. And therefore what we want to do is work to solve some sort of problem or address some sort of issue that's cropping up. So we do research to help resolve or address some societal issue or a consumer issue or a business issue. We don't just do it for the sake of it. It has to be done with a purpose. So a definition like that is a good starting point. You can see it is quite cumbersome, but once we break up definitions like that, you can see how each component there is really quite valuable. This is the general research process that I mentioned just a moment ago, and what I guess is most notable about this is that it's not a linear process. It's very much seen as a cyclical process. So often when we conduct research, the most interesting studies will leave you with more questions than what you had to begin with, and therefore lead to further research. Step one is usually described as defining the problem. This might seem really quite straightforward and intuitive, but it's an important step not to skip. So very often when a research problem or issue is raised and presented to you as a researcher, it's presented in a very vague or non-specific way. So what do consumers think of something, or how will people react when something happens? So as a first step, it's really about narrowing down and putting some bounds or some scope around that particular issue. Step 2 is then planning the research. So thinking about what sort of research is appropriate to address that problem. Is it something like an interview where we want to get people's opinions, or are we looking to run an experiment and work out how one variable impacts some other variable? What is it exactly that we want to do? So the nature of the research will depend on the type of problem that we have. Once we've worked out what sort of research we want to conduct, we'll think about step 3, which is planning our sample, thinking about who it is that we're going to ask questions to, or who it is that we're going to gather data from, and how we're going to do that in an objective way. We then go out and collect the data. We try to do it in a very impartial way, come back and analyze that data, and then try to draw conclusions from that data. As I said, usually when we've drawn those conclusions, you often have another question or another set of questions that you want to answer or that you want to investigate. As a researcher in academia, you often have the ability to pursue that and answer those additional questions. If you're working in a research firm, often you can't pursue that because you're working for someone else. So I guess that's one benefit of working in a university that I've noticed. So takeaway point from that is that research, or the research process, is very much cyclical. It's not just one stage, and it's not just a linear process. A few distinctions that are useful to know about when you're thinking about research, and we touched on this in the last video, or this distinction in the last video, and that is the distinction between qualitative research and quantitative research. Qualitative research being more verbal, interpretive research, so research based on techniques like interviews and focus groups, where the researcher wants really rich, detailed information, and then they look to draw themes out of that information to make their conclusions. What they're looking at is trying to get really deep information in order to answer some question that they've got. Quantitative research is more reliant on things like surveys and experiments. Here they're looking to quantify characteristics of some phenomenon. They use numerical data, and the idea is that they then will come back and use statistical analyses to look at, for example, differences across groups on some characteristic. Might be level of consumer confidence, for example, across two different market segments, or the relationship between certain variables, so the extent to which social media usage corresponds to something like materialism, for example. Right? So two very different types of research, and usually they attract quite different types of people. Qualitative researchers are often more the friendly, chatty type who are after those richer interpretations, a little bit more fluffy. Sometimes they don't like numbers too much. Quantitative researchers, on the other hand, are much more hard, almost number junkies in some cases, where they're looking to gather data to try to get at those objective findings. So there's much less scope for subjective interpretation with quantitative research, because you're dealing with hard and fast numbers where a calculation will give you the results of your data. So people often fall into one category or another. There has, I guess, in the last decade or so, maybe a little bit longer, developed a trend towards what we call mixed methods research, where people will employ both methods, often starting out with qualitative research such as interviews and focus groups to get an idea around a topic or an understanding around a topic, and then subsequently employing quantitative research in the form of, say, surveys to gather more detailed, quantifiable information. So mixed methods is also an option, and there are some people out there that are experts in mixed methods. We'll talk about this further a little bit later in the semester, particularly in tutorials. Another distinction to be aware of is basic versus applied research, and you're probably already aware of this distinction. Basic research being more the theoretical, knowledge-based research, looking at answering questions around how and why certain things occur, or how and why certain things happen. This is the sort of research conducted by think tanks, by universities, and some of the large market research firms are also conducting basic research now. The types of questions we might ask with basic research are really quite general questions that would apply to a range of settings. So are there certain types of personalities that are more inclined to engage in saving behavior or sustainable consumption, for example? Or we might be interested in differences in consumption across cultures, or whether or not framing a message positively or negatively impacts some sort of social marketing outcome. All of these questions are quite important to ask, and we consider it basic level research because applied research can build off that and apply that to business questions. Applied research, as listed here, is really done to address some specific problem, usually some problem that a business or some organization has encountered, or a question that they have. So, for example, the questions such as, given that we've introduced a celebrity into our marketing campaign, how has that impacted sales, or are people behaving differently? It might be a question such as, what is the impact of introducing a social media feed on our website in terms of people's perceptions of our business? Those sorts of questions, very day-to-day questions. Universities are increasingly doing more applied research as well as basic research, and especially disciplines like marketing or advertising or PR are doing both applied and basic research. And some of this is driven by a need for funding, but also a need to demonstrate relevance. The methodologies that we'll learn about in AMB 201 are really common to both basic and applied research domains. So you can think about interviews, focus groups. They're going to be used in both basic and applied level research, as are observational techniques, surveys and experiments. Now, you've probably had some experience with some of these techniques in the past. So a lot of people have already taken part in focus groups and have an idea of what they're about. Some people will have done experiments. Most of us will have done surveys. What I would suggest, particularly if you haven't had a lot of experience with these things, and focus groups, interviews, observational techniques, these are some that not everyone has experienced. What I would suggest is go along when those are available in the SONA studies and take part, see what they're about, get an idea of how they're set up, how they're conducted, what you feel like as a participant, and whether or not you think you are likely to supply valid information for the researchers in those settings, because if you think that there are problems with that sort of study, then that will help you judge whether or not you deem findings that you encounter in the future as being credible or trustworthy or not. So going along to those studies can really help to inform your understanding of research in general, and that's why we've got that participant perspective component in AMB 201 assessment, and it's something I'd strongly recommend you try. So who is suited to a market research career or a research career in general? What I'd say is that those people who enjoy it most tend to be the people who have a curious mind, or are generally puzzle-solving sort of people who are continually questioning why something occurs, how something can be done better, whether or not something is effective, or whether or not it works. So if you go through a supermarket, for example, and you question whether or not a price ending in 99 cents versus ending in 00, around a figure, makes a difference, then we can examine that with research. If you look at a website and you see different colors and you wonder why they've been chosen or how that's impacting on people's purchase behavior, or if you look at the targeted advertising in social media and wonder whether or not that's effective or how it could be made more effective, then you're probably already thinking down the lines of what can be answered with research. So learning about research gives you the tools to be able to address some of those questions or answer some of those things that you want to know more about. So we say market research career, or a research career, is suited to people who enjoy thinking and who are generally curious. There are two broad areas that you can go into. You can think about research in academia, which is where I am, and you can think about research within industry. They're both interesting areas to go into, but for slightly different reasons. If you think about research within an academic setting, you have a lot of freedom in academia. You're not necessarily working for a client or working to resolve a client's problem all the time. A lot of your research is self-directed, it's theory-driven, so as you get to know a theory more and you can see its limitations, you start to understand what sorts of questions need to be asked. And you can then conduct self-directed research, which is really quite satisfying and really quite rewarding because you're getting to answer questions that you have yourself. Right? So that's where it's really quite valuable. It does tend to be more theory and knowledge focused, and that sounds really dull and boring when you hear it, but in reality, once you get into that and you start to develop theories for why certain things occur, it becomes very interesting and very rewarding. More and more, as I said, academia is also spanning into applied settings because of the need to obtain additional funding and the need to help resolve societal problems as well. So we do span a broad range of areas. Research within industry is also interesting. People working in industry often work on a wide range of projects. They might work on many projects across the year, so they get a good diversity of experiences. Some will be more qualitative, some will be more quantitative, and some will focus on both, depending on the projects that a firm attracts. One of the things with industry-based research is that the research conducted is very much client-driven. So you're conducting research to answer someone else's question. Within industry, you're not so much working on those basic level problems, you're more addressing those day-to-day client issues or business issues. And very often people will find that really rewarding because you can see a clear outcome and you're providing an answer to someone who has a question. The other thing with working in industry that's really quite positive is that industry often has more funding to conduct larger scale studies because the client is paying for that research to be done. So funding availability is a big positive with working in industry. So two different pathways to go if you're thinking about a research career, both very interesting, both very rewarding. If you are interested in pursuing a research pathway or want to learn more about research in general, we do have two relatively new units that now run within the School of Advertising, Marketing and Public Relations. They're at the third level, so they follow nicely on a unit like AMB 201. The first is AMB 305 and it runs in first semester of each year. We call this Analysis for Consumer Insights. This is a small workshop based subject that we run in a computer lab, and it generally has around 20 or so students, so it's a very small collegial group. And what we do in this subject is give you training in some industry-based software packages. So in AMB 201 what we do is teach you how to conduct qualitative analysis by hand, and I demonstrate analysis of quantitative data using SPSS. In this next subject, AMB 305, what we do is train you up in using NVivo, which is a qualitative analysis software package. So that you're able to do that yourself and you can see how large qualitative data sets can be managed and analyzed. And we also train you fairly extensively in SPSS, which is a quantitative data analysis package. So these are leading industry-based software packages that many interviewers will ask you about if you go for a market research position. So they're quite valuable in that respect, and students really enjoy this subject because they get a lot of hands-on experience with those packages. It's very practical. AMB 306 is Advanced Consumer Research, and it runs in second semester of each year. And this is again a small workshop oriented subject. We usually have around say 20, maybe 25 students. And this is a lot more research focused in terms of designing research projects, and primarily experimental research projects where students develop a proposal based on their own research ideas for a study that can be conducted to address a real life problem. So it's really quite valuable in teaching people to think critically and understanding the nuances of research in order to understand how to go about putting a research project together and produce that proposal. So both of these subjects are third level subjects that really build on those skills that you develop in a subject like AMB 201. And so far across the 2 semesters that we've run each of these subjects, we've had a large number of these students actually go on to take up market research positions. That's really positive to see. Now, if you do want to undertake one of these subjects, come and have a chat with me and I'll tell you how to go about building them into your study plan, or you can chat to the Business Student Support Centre on level 4 about how to build them into your study plan. Because they are new subjects, they're not automatically included in a lot of student study plans. And additionally, we sometimes get double degree students who want to undertake these subjects, and that is very doable, but we have to substitute out something else in order to fit these in. So come and chat with me and I can let you know how to go about doing that. And I'll provide links to these in the Learning Resources section of Module 1 on the Blackboard side if you want to read a little bit more. Alright, and beyond undergraduate degrees, we've also got additional degrees that you might be interested in if you are looking to pursue a research career. I've got links to each of those provided there, but feel free to come and talk to me about these as well if it is of interest to you. We've got an honours degree, a master's degree, and also a doctoral degree, or a PhD. So honours is a degree done at the end of undergraduate. It's a 2-semester degree where you'll take 4 subjects to learn about higher level research, but then spend the equivalent of half of that time conducting your own research project together with an academic within the school as your supervisor. So the goal there is to produce a high level research thesis, but also some research findings that could potentially be published and lead to a research article, like the journal articles that you cite writing up your uni assignments. An MPhil, or master's degree, Master of Philosophy, is a 3 to 4 semester degree, a lot like honours, where you're taking 4 subjects learning about higher level research, but here you spend between 2 semesters and 3 semesters doing higher level research. Again, you're working with an academic within the school to produce a research thesis and potentially publish that work. I guess one of the draw cards of an MPhil for a domestic student is that it's a master's degree that is actually fee-free. So if you're a domestic student, the government will typically waive fees for MPhil students to help encourage people into that because of the value that it produces in terms of knowledge generation. So an MPhil is a really attractive option. Both honours and MPhil can be done at the end of an undergraduate degree. A PhD or a doctoral degree, however, can only be done after honours and after an MPhil degree. So this is a 3-year research degree where you get a doctorate at the end of it. Alright, and the page here is a capture from the QUT Business School where student projects are listed. You could have a read about those there. The link is down the bottom. It also contains a list of projects that are currently being advertised to recruit students into for research degrees. Alright, so from today's video, or this video, we've gone through a good definition of marketing research. It helps to show just how complex it is and how much we need to really think about that as a process and acting objectively as we go through that process. We've talked about the dichotomies of quantitative versus qualitative research, basic versus applied research, and potential careers in market research that you might want to look at. It's not a career for everyone, but if I spark some interest, please come and see me. Happy to chat with you about that. In the next video, we'll talk more about that research process and some of the different types of research that we can conduct in order to answer specific types of questions.